Welcome to episode number 134 of the Cheesesteaks and Controllers podcast. Coming at you a little later than usual, but there's a good reason, I promise you. And as soon as we get right into it, you'll understand what that is. My name is Jason Finelli, and I am the video game and competitive gaming insider for Fox PHL The Gambler, 102.5 FM, 1480 AM, iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcasts. You can download and listen to this right now. And this is a special episode. I don't think I've ever done an episode like this before. I have had interviews. I've had interviews that go longer than one segment. I've had guests for the entire show, but I don't think I've ever done an actual episode-long interview. It's going to be quite a quest, and that it's appropriate that the first time I ever do this is with the folks who made WrestleQuest. Mega Cat Studios is back on Cheesesteaks and Controllers, and we're going to talk about the game because that launch is finally knocking on the door. James Deighan, Zack Manko, back with me here on Cheesesteaks and Controllers to talk about WrestleQuest. Gentlemen, how's it going?
Good, man.
Well, I'm excited to come back. We're huge fans of cheesecake and controllers. You can see how we ended up here.
A cheesesteak, cheesecake, I don't. You can call me whatever you want. If you're gonna keep coming back on the show
and those things individually, yes.
Dude,
yes.
The more protein, the better. Find it all in.
Amen.
That's correct. Amen to that. So, last time we saw each other was PAX East. Zack was doing his a very good professional wrestling outing there in that boxing ring that you guys had.
Debut, yeah.
How did that feel getting into the ring as opposed to just watching from afar?
So honestly, great. Like just even when we had so for those that don't know, at PAX East we had a real ring on site, and we had real indie pro wrestlers there. When the wrestling wasn't going on, we were in the ring hanging out. We had a photo booth set up, and just being in the ring between the ropes, up on a stand, it does make you just want to like bounce off the ropes, throw your friends around. You just get giddy being in there. So yeah, it was definitely a blast. And then we did do some some actual pro wrestling. We had a skit going on where my arch nemesis stole the game and wasn't going to release it, but we managed to defeat him. So
yes, nothing says pro wrestling like let's determine the ownership of this IP or this property than with a wrestling match. The only other thing that trumps that is custody of a child. We've done that already about 18 years ago. So James, you're watching this match. You're watching Zack, do his thing in the ring, and you have to be half excited and half, oh my God, I hope he doesn't hurt himself. We have too much work to do between now and August, right?
It's funny. We take so many risks, it never crossed my mind. And at no point did I think, man, if Zack breaks his neck, what happens? I just kept thinking, go Zack. Finally living our dream in there,
truly wrestlefied ourselves.
What if I told you, Jason, that WrestleQuest was actually the prequel to Zack actually becoming a wrestler, and the game is just second to that?
That would be the most unique indie wrestling story of the last couple of years, I feel like. If this game ends with Muchacho Man Randy Santos actually being Zack Manko, and it's just like this live shot where he's the one playing with the toys at the end, and he just opens a door, and he's like in a screaming, oh man, that's a great idea. There's your DLC pitch right there. Zack, we're launching Zack's career.
Now we're talking.
Now, were they local wrestlers to the Boston area? Did you bring them from other parts of the country? I noticed one of them, at least, I've already seen in my playthrough. He's standing, where was he? Was he at the Macho Man statue, I think?
Yeah. Cal Hero.
Yeah. So Cal Hero. So are they, were they local Boston or friends of yours? Like, how'd you find them?
So Cal was a friend of ours. Vinny's a friend of ours. So Cal we met way back through bookings. His dad, David, has been like a career wrestling community ambassador. He's just one of these bookers that everybody loves. He just treats talent really well. He just is a really consistent guy.
Love that.
And Cal's on the come up. and we just we met David. We just clicked immediately, and he just loved like our kind of approach to like talent forward, transparency, and integrity driven deals. And he was like, "This was great. Not a lot of those all the time in wrestling. Let's find more ways to work together." And as we got to know Cal, we like loved him. He has a fanny pack gimmick, which you can imagine as a retro gaming based like retro company, we have a soft spot for fanny packs.
Mm-hmm.
And then Vinny Lee Glamrock, who was there. So Vinny was the original trademark copyright owner for the name WrestleQuest. So he had an app he was working on that was intended to connect all of the different independent wrestling events into one place. And it's funny, like Vinny was working on that app while we were working the game and both using the name. We just put the barn like upside down, like reverse mortgage our houses, place a giant bet. And Vinny was like, every once in a while I'll work on this app on my free time. And after many love letters and emails and phone calls, eventually to his employer to get a hold of him, we were able to come to terms on the WrestleQuest trademark. Excellent. And we became friends. It's funny that he's actually from Northern PA, but Vinny's like a good friend of us now. Like I love Vinny. We were just talking to him this morning, and we knew we wanted something with Kyle and Vinny to connect as like our two like retro themed wrestlers. Like if you look at the Vinny Glamrock's backstory, he's like electrocuted by a Nintendo controller to become a wrestler. Pretty good stuff.
That is excellent.
But we just knew they had to be together at some point. So when we had our wish list item granted through Skybound of having the ring live at PAX East, which was a feat in and of its own, getting through all the insurance requirements, the paperwork, and getting all the enforcers like comfortable with the idea of Zack wrestling everybody. Like, we basically decided we wanted those folks to be there, and then we wanted to get like top performing indie talent that for a casual wrestling audience at PAX, they get excited. And there's some folks there like JT Dunn, who's like top 3 unsigned independent talent.
Yeah.
Like right now, he's awesome. Zack actually has like a JT Dunn collection on his hard drive.
Really?
That's true.
Of his matches?
Although maybe it's Becca actually.
Somebody say we have different collections for different reasons.
That's true.
I'm just a fan of his heelisms. Like he's just a master heel.
Yeah,
so.
He's my favorite heel at PAX East. Like I was dying every time he was like calling out Yoshi or making like, Pokemon, you're never gonna catch them all. Like I was just so into all of his ad hoc like heelless life. Like he was just great. Awesome performer. But it's like we're just fans of wrestling, and so I made WrestleQuest. And as we got to go through like the series of booking, it was a lot of fun being able to work with David and some local promotions and kind of cherry pick. Also we got to ask them which of them are wrestling and gaming fans, and like that intersection was key, and which there's plenty of hands to choose from. Not to mention Little Mean Kathleen. I don't want to like go let her go unnoticed. She was hilarious. I remember distinctly locking eyes with you, Jason, whenever we were watching their first card. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm really glad to pick that up. That was I would say top 5 proudest moments of being at MegaCat would be like looking over and seeing the team respond to like the crowd of people like going like WrestleQuest, WrestleQuest. Like it was pretty wild, man. And it's the unifying energy of wrestling, right? Like it was just like too much fun for people to ignore. All these like lapsed wrestling fans that had probably not watched wrestling in a long time were just like vacuumed into the entertainment factor. And it was just awesome. It was so much fun to be part of. I wish every event we did was like that. I was just saying to the team, I don't want to go to PAX West this year because there's no wrestling ring. What's the point? Right?
Well, I mean, you could always resurrect Backstage Assault and just start doing like just put a circle down and do hardcore in the parking lot. Maybe it's like a viral parking lot thing.
Yeah, super. Totally.
I'm sure they would. We want to talk insurance requirements. Oh dear. So, for one thing, real quick, I do want to. I think a special mention. The one wrestler who sticks out in my head, besides Zack, of course, was he the Angel of Love? Was he Cupid? Or I still think about that gimmick, and I'm like, man, I wish I could see that a little more prevalently. Talk to me about that guy? He's excellent.
Looking up the name of that tag team right now. So they're
Shot Through the Heart.
That's right. Yeah, they're so good. I actually have an autographed 8x10 from the event somewhere in the office.
Nice. Yeah, that act was really cool.
Dude, the entrance was great too, right?
Yeah.
Like the song, it was just so good, man.
Excellent. So coming out of PAX East, I have to say two things. The crowd, like you said, was electric, and there was always a crowd at your booth, whether it was in line for the photos or when you were doing the wrestling matches. There were people watching through the glass in the catwalk. You were in prime position there. I don't know if you intended that, but that was prime spot so people could still watch up above. It seemed like excitement was high, and overall opinion of people I spoke to on the floor and articles that I read after the fact was positive. Is that what you took away too, or were there some things that maybe were said to you or whatever that you thought, okay, this is something we need to work on or what we need to focus on going forward?
We did get some feedback that was constructive, but
That's good.
most of it was like high fives and like heartwarming wrestling stories and fan mail for Zack's wrestling career.
Yes. All right.
Honestly, it was that'll be the first and maybe only ever trade show we go to where we just have fans in line, just super hype, just telling us how excited they are about the game. Because normally when we're at a trade show, one of the main reasons we're there is to collect live, like dynamic feedback from like expert players and look at ways to improve the game and see what we can learn from these like pre-launch showings. And because WrestleQuest had been through so many like fistfuls of focus groups and play sessions and events, it was like finally ready for its main event, right? Mm-hmm. Like it didn't just show up for PAX East that year. We already brought it to 2 other PAX East, and we worked on it for a while. So
this is where you went all out. This was
no doubt
all out for
no doubt
all out trademark that the owners. I don't own all that. The people who own all that, I'm just saying the 2 words. Leave me alone, Tony. So now having done that, I understand you are going to Comic-Con this week, which is part of the reason why we have met where we're meeting today. They will be at San Diego Comic-Con. If you're listening to this, and you will be too, check them out. I am the Skybound booth, I imagine. You'll have demos there. Is that where you'll be? Do they have a wrestling ring for you this time?
Well, I can't spoil what we have this time.
Oh!
Not a wrestling ring, but it's pretty dope. I think if you're a wrestling fan, there's gonna be a whole lot of stuff to do.
All right, making a note, since I won't be at Comic-Con, ask after we are done talking today, after I stop recording. That's awesome. Cool. So they'll be at San Diego Comic-Con this week. You saw them at PAX East. Launch is coming up soon, August the 9th. We are knocking on the door. How do you feel going into the final month? You're in the final month now before launch. 5 years in the making. Here we are. What are your first thoughts when you think, man, we are at the finish line?
Well, August 8th, actually.
Oh, 8th. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Sorry.
Gave you a day.
Honestly, I'm mostly worried about Zack's wrestling career these days. The game's ready. It's tested. It's localized. It's balanced. We've been oiling and doing push-ups and just smack talking each other and just going hard for enough cycles now that we feel like the fans are ready to get some WrestleQuest in. So I can't wait for Andy to push the button since Andy released all the games. But
good job, Andy.
He's the
yeah,
guy.
no doubt. Yeah, everyone's good at something,
He's like Shawn Michaels in that GIF. He's just like,
dude, yeah. And it's like for years he just stretching the fingers out, like making sure it's ready, lining up over the button, tapping various keys. But it's like Mario teaches typing, but there's just one key, and he's the WrestleQuest launch keyboard. And he's been pre-training this the whole time.
He comes into the office, he's slapping himself in the cheeks. I got this.
Dude, no doubt. You know what I'm most excited about for WrestleQuest? And this, I guess, is also for Zack, but for anyone listening, we just packed WrestleQuest with Easter eggs and fan moments. Like,
sure
crazy. And I just cannot wait for people to find them and share them, because the few that have little bits here and there would leak, or we share them with first party partners or promotional partners, like the reaction has been so incredibly positive. Like it's just very obvious that it's crafted with care by wrestling fans and RPG fans, and I just can't wait for people to share some of these insane things we packed in for no good reason other than like love for it. Like definitely not a commercial reason.
Yeah.
And I just can't wait. I can't wait for Twitter to blow up with people finding some of these really wild things that we brought to life in the game.
Zach, you want to comment on that?
Just as far as emotions leading up to launch, you're right. It's been this multi-year long development process. So it is kind of like very exciting, very sweaty time. I'm sure once it's actually launched, it'll be like, like bittersweet. It's like finishing like a movie or a TV show or something. Where you're like, wow, like, it's almost like, now what? But I know that WrestleQuest, we've definitely WrestleFied ourselves, and I can't imagine the next project. I'm excited to see the next project and taking that energy like into it, taking the mindset of like WrestleFication and, stronger, more dramatic, more story, more impact, more wow moments, that type of thing, and applying that to, a game that has nothing to do with wrestling and see what happens.
Okay, so that actually answered a question I had later on. If you would concept in your next game, if you have a choice, would it be trying to adapt something else to an RPG or try to adapt wrestling to something else? And I think you just answered my question.
Oh man, yeah. I honestly like both. Like I love RPGs. Definitely favorite genre. I don't have as much time to play them now as I did growing up and whatnot. But
sure.
I mean, obviously, that's one of the goals of WrestleQuest was taking that beloved JRPG formula and then updating the parts that haven't aged so well, exploring something that's completely new. WrestleQuest it's wrestling world. So you're not in yet another like kind of fantasy world. It's this entirely new setup and everything. But I would love to do another RPG, and just as we WrestleFied RPGs, maybe there's something else you can adapt to that formula. But I think the lens that we did it through with WrestleQuest, you can take sort of the spirit behind it, if not the actual, boots to the ground tactics.
Right. James, you have a thought there?
I wish every game we did was wrestling based or wrestling inspired.
Nothing wrong with that.
I would say that there was a couple of different times throughout this process, Zack and I talked about just rebranding like WrestleCat Studios.
Oh,
and like,
I like it.
We've often talked about the wrestlification and how, like, really, wrestling can be used across any mechanic, any genre, and there's nothing preventing us from, even aside from what we hope is WrestleQuest 2, like everything can benefit from a little bit of wrestling powder. There's no doubt.
100% agree with that at all. Although I wonder if wrestle powder, as long as it's a powder and not a shot, we're okay.
I want to add to that, Jason. I was pretty bummed out to see that the domain name WrestleVania was taken, because I was like, that was going to be my next one.
Oh, that's a good one. But and you might be able to consult a fellow indie. I think they're still in the studio, the Guacamelee team, because they basically did that with Lucha Libre. They made it in Metroidvania. But yeah, WrestleVania. Oh God, I like that. I like that a lot. I was actually, I had been following the game, so I knew what you were coming into, what you were trying to do here. But I was surprised with how many people came away impressed that, like, the whole, I'm not a wrestling fan, I'm an RPG fan, and this still works for me, right? That sort of opinion. Prevalent throughout PAX East. I know I've read it again after this most recent preview run, last week, I think Embargo was, if I remember correctly. Did you expect that? Like, were you hoping for that sort of reaction where you get the non-wrestling fans to play the RPG? You figured you had the wrestling fans to try out the RPG format. I feel like if I have to, it would be easier to convince a wrestling fan to try this than it would be to convince an RPG fan to try this. Does that make sense? And do you think you have done that so far before we've gotten into the launch here?
Since we first started the game, I don't want to speak for Zack. So he has a whole lot to say on this topic,
and he'll beat you up. He's a wrestler now.
I know, dude. Trust me, he lets everybody know. Okay.
I just break their chairs before they get to work.
He has to drive. He has to drive 30 minutes to fill his gas tank these days because he keeps causing trouble with every gas station attendant.
He just greets people with an Okada elbow.
Jimmy John's won't deliver to the office. Everyone's very hungry here. But the origin of WrestleQuest's design was, how do we take like a genre we have so much reverence for, that we were raised by, that we love, and we know as a player what goes into progression and systems and balancing, and just to make a good RPG or a great RPG is the goal. It's it's a massive undertaking, and we decided from a product standpoint that if we were going to double or triple down on WrestleQuest, as we did, that we had to make it accessible to someone who doesn't like wrestling. So we've been focusing on, since day zero, how do we make it a great RPG through a wrestling lens, and the wrestling characters can come to life, and we can actually introduce people to wrestling. And I say top 5 proudest moments for Mega Cat. One of them was the ring, and one of them that I think shared with a lot of the team members is we had a member of the press at the first PAX East that played it that like discovered wrestling through WrestleQuest.
Oh,
and he wrote us this awesome like fan mail later. It was like months later, and he's like, I took your advice and I started with the WrestleManias, and he's like, I subscribed to Peacock. He's like, and now I'm like consuming every Sunday a few hours of it for fun. And he's like, I just love this so much. He's like, you brought all of the fun that I find in like anime through this larger than life set of real characters. And he's like, I just can't deal with that plus the nostalgia. He's like, I feel like I've missed out on 20 years of wrestling, and you like saved me from losing 20 more. Like, thank you so much. It was
awesome.
just this really great email. And I remember showing the team, I'm like, well, I guess we won, boys. You know, like
we did it.
Even if we don't ship the game, what else can we say? You know, we changed someone's life. We're changing lives around here. What do you do with your game? You know.
And the team was like, "We're shipping the game, though, right?" You're like, "Yes,
Dude,
of course."
Yeah, no doubt. I'm like, guys, calm down. We're just here to evangelize wrestling fans. You know, like it's like you can't make that stuff up. It's like some of my favorite memories of being at MegaCat have been these like profoundly cool fan moments where people tell you they propose to their wives playing one of our games, or they, you know,
that's cool.
all those things are what you really remember way later after the Metacritic, after the sales, and it's like the idea that we introduce people to something we love so dearly like that is just amazing.
So
Zach, I don't mean to keep you out of that. I know how much you care about all these things. Please like share your sentiment.
Totally. I mean, from the ground up, the game is always meant to appeal to both audiences, wrestling fans, JRPG fans. And it's weird because, you know, we were very shocked that pro wrestling hasn't been explored through an RPG, you know, prior to this. Just because there is so much shared blood there between the larger life characters, the storytelling, you know, these betrayals, dramatic reveals, like even a boss fight in RPG. I mean, that's like a pay-per-view for wrestling.
Yep.
So there's, you know, obviously all of those correlations are explored. So I was also pleased to see people come up and like say like, well, I love RPGs, but never watch wrestling, and then play the demo at the booth and then come away like, well, this is awesome. I can't wait. You know, I maybe I should check out wrestling now. And anytime someone's playing, I'll always preface like RPG fan, wrestling fan, both, neither, and no matter what, they seem to come away like just pumped for the game. So happy to hear that. Yeah.
Now in your wrestlfication of the JRPG, I do want to talk about that panel too at PAX East. Was excellent. Did you find that there was a part of pro wrestling, like a certain section, whatever it may be, that didn't fit as well into the RPG formula as you kind of hoped it would? Like you have, obviously, wrestlers, you have moves, you have the pin mechanic, which I also want to talk about. That's great. Managers as a passive fourth party member. Was there any facet of pro wrestling that you were like, well, we can incorporate it this way, but it may not be to its full potential? Does that make sense? You understand what I'm getting at there?
I think there's some stuff that we probably could have taken like to the next level, and that had we had a do over a WrestleQuest 2 that we'll definitely, you know, address. Like obviously wrestling is very physical, and I do think that the combat in WrestleQuest reflects that well while maintaining a turn-based framework. But I think there's additional things we could do to make it, you know, pop off even more in the next go around.
James?
You know, we have over 10,000 hand-drawn sprites in WrestleQuest, just a crazy amount of art. And, you know, part of like the spectacle and fun of these just insane handcrafted moments, and I wish we had more in budget and timeline for that. I could probably have worked on WrestleQuest forever, so take it with a grain of salt. But I love the setup. I love like, you know, cutting promos and you know, having these big moments. And I wish we had enough budget and proven market for what everyone said was not going to land, to be able to capture things like, you know, crazy camera finishing moments and like these like the dramatic, you know, scenes and dramatic moments within a match of a boss battle, and actually really zooming in and having just insanely cool additional animations, which we already did a lot for that. But it's like I feel like that's just as a wrestling fan, something I could have used even more of, like just pour that sauce until it was over the cup, you know.
Yep, that's fair. No, that's completely fair. And again, since you're hand drawing these animations, if the game's already taken 5 years, you don't want it to take 5 more for something like that.
I'll be dead, dude. I don't get that many years left, Jason.
With 80-year-old James Deighan all of a sudden. So let's get into that panel that you had at PAX East, the JRPG, was it wrestlfication of JRPG, JRPication of pro wrestling, the name, okay, wrestlfication of JRPG. I thought it was a fascinating talk that really got into like your philosophy behind this game. I loved the mentions of Super Mario RPG, which, by the way, our time has come. That game is finally back after 27 years. So I remember seeing that trailer and being like, oh, the WrestleQuest guys are going to love this. Like, I cried. I don't know about you, but I cried. But anyway.
I cry every day.
My eyes are welling again. Don't bring it up. Not during the interview, Jason. You know how I feel about Gino Amalo. And every time you do it, you just push the buttons.
It's so good. And they look great. Okay, yeah, I could do an entire interview on that. And you guys didn't make that. We're talking about the game that you made. So for those who weren't at the panel, or you're doing it again at San Diego, right?
Bigger and better.
And better.
More wrestlers this time, too.
So for some poor sap who was at PAX East and wasn't at San Diego Comic-Con, or won't be at San Diego Comic-Con, talk to me about what you might touch on here that you've added since last time, or maybe expanded upon certain topics that were addressed in that panel that you've had some time to like flesh out this time.
Well, Zach, before you take over, I wanted to add that Sergeant Slaughter, Jake the Snake, Jeff Jarrett are going to be giving the panel with us.
Oh, that's awesome.
Comic-Con, yeah. And, Sarge has been making Zach do a ton of push-ups constantly.
Good.
Called Maggot a lot.
Yeah, lots of that, yeah. And then just in general, we're able to go a little bit further behind the curtain for like how these folks were involved more than just licenses. Like we've been really specific in that, like some of the talent, we've actually been able to apply their creative and some of their insights on what it's like actually being on the road or what it's like living through this independent and professional circuit basis. And they definitely have some stories to tell. So those folks are part of the panel this time. And then the head wrestle father himself, Zack, please, talk a little bit about the wrestlfication panel. Because we just got done redoing it, like V3, taking all the different, I want to say like fan service moments or questions and requests people have had, and making sure that that's front and center to give them all the additional wish list information they wanted to see.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think as far as what's been expanded on or what's been added since PAX East, besides what James mentioned, really the focus on the section about JRPG like tropes or staples and how we wrestlefied them. Like we talked a little bit about the combat, but really the idea of wrestlfication is making it, adding wrestling, so making it bigger, sweatier, more spectacle. So something even as simple as opening a locked door in an RPG. It's this mundane mechanic you find everywhere. So how do you wrestlefy that? How do you turn that into something that's a delight for the player? And the way we did in WrestleQuest is instead of locked doors, you find tables blocking your path. And if you know anything about wrestling, you know that table's getting smashed.
That's right.
So instead of finding a key, you find this token that summons an NPC wrestler that you pick up and slams at the table. So now when you open a door, it's this, it's this funny, awesome animation of your guy pile driving it. And it's different for whatever lead character you have too. So, even that little bit mixes it up and adds that flair. But again, it's about taking these like kind of stay at elements and amping them up, wrestlefying them.
I love that table spot, by the way. The first time I did it in the paint shop. It's early in the game, so anybody who's gonna play it, that's not a big spoiler. But oh man, as soon as I did that for the first time and I realized what was actually happening, I'm like, wow. And I played that in the demo at PAX East, and I did it again in the preview build, and I don't know if I just forgot or I put it out of my mind, but to see it again, I was like, oh yeah, this is still awesome. Even the second time. Yeah. So I love that mechanic there. I also like that you have two stories going on. I didn't remember that. So Randy Santos, Muchacho Man, voiced by Patrick Hickey, is the main guy. He's the guy that you've had. He's front and center in the posters and everything else. But there's a whole other side story going on here, which I feel like is more rooted in wrestling history. I'm sure this is intentional. I'm getting major Hart family vibes from this other story. There's a dungeon in the basement. It's in the north. There's all these different sort of things that are giving me this edge. So is this like, is the Muchacho Man story like the RPG story, and then the other story like the wrestling history story? Or I imagine they're going to blend at some point, but how how is like writing two different stories to come together? Like, did you intend to do that, or did you try to put a little bit of history into both? Am I making sense here? I feel like I'm not making any sense here. I don't know. Just the Logan story seems like it's more steeped in wrestling history for the longtime fans.
Before Zach jumps in, because Zach can go deep on this, but I would argue that there's many great legacy wrestling families, like
Sure,
the Rhodes and the Funks, and it's like Brink definitely intended to like the Logan family is intended to be this homegrown wrestling dynasty, and also when we talked about laying out the world map and the different styles of wrestling and the regions of wrestling, and we had to have something with the great history of Canadian wrestling because there's so many of them, right? And all that said, we did sign Bret Hart, then we had to terminate the agreement, so that sucks.
Yes.
So thanks, Jason. But
sorry,
no. I'm just messing around. But it's yeah. I mean, it was like our part of our original product was to have like something representing all these pillars. And then when we signed Bret, we went really deep on Brink. And then whenever Bret was terminated with WWE purchasing out everything, we had to make some really hard changes. And we decided we loved like the Logan family too much, so we just made sure that there was enough about it that was not just Hart based. And there's so much to that too. There's probably 50 wrestling families we found that are multi-generational, that are just these rich kind of breeding grounds of just crazy wrestling talent that the industry wouldn't be the same without them. And there's just an epic number of Canadian wrestlers, like just crazy good talent that comes out of Canada. And
really,
oh yeah, I mean it's like it's probably 10 pages of content on Wikipedia for Canadian wrestlers. Like Chris Jericho is a great one, right?
Yeah.
And it's like there's actually a number of wrestling schools and independent wrestling feds through Canada, which is not a great slog for traveling. Actually got some folks from my gym that wrestle in Nova Scotia, and but locally here in Prince William gym, but it's definitely a I would say like celebrated sport. It's not hockey, but it's
right.
It's definitely like a celebrated Canadian event. But Zach, I know you know the Logans personally. I know you actually went to school with Brink, so
yeah, totally got stretched in the same gyms. So as far as the difference between Muchacho Man and Brink Logan, Muchacho Man is this starry-eyed, innocent, like loved wrestling his whole life, and his thing is that he exists in constant kayfabe. Like for him, wrestling is all real, all the time. Whereas Brink is very much in the know. Like he's a mid-card jobber in his father's promotion, and he does it even though he's like very technically capable. He's actually a very proficient wrestler. He's willing to take on that role to help the family business out. Like he understands like, okay, these guys are hot right now, like sure, I'll help put them over. But it grates on him where he wants to be a champion because he knows he is the better wrestler. Whereas Muchacho Man, he wants to be a hero. Like he sees these faces on screen, he's like, I want to be like that. I want to be this super good guy. So for him, his journey is more about how do I become this hero, this face, without compromising that starry-eyed idealism, like without, as he gets into the ins and outs of the industry, how does he do that without compromising, without losing his soul, really, is kind of like his narrative. Whereas Brinks is more about, well, how do I become a champion on my own terms? How do I get the belt without, kind of shoving my family to the side, letting the family business down? How do I spread my wings, without kicking dirt in my family's face type of thing. Sure. So they're sort of like opposite sides of the same coin. Muchacho Man is very like brash and bold and brazen, and that speaks to like his moveset. Whereas Brink, is opposite colors, cool colors, calm, cool, collected. He's professional, and his style is less grandiose and more technical wrestling based and everything. So and that it plays into the game mechanics as well. Muchacho Man is more like hard hitting, spread attack damage type things, whereas Brinks is more disabling attacks and I'll put you in a submission hold, add a debuff, that type of thing.
I love that dichotomy too. There's two different play styles, but you also in the sections with Brink Logan, you have his brother, who is more of the hard hitter, so you still have that. Yep. And then the sister shows up after a while. Oh, yeah. She's interesting. She what sort of RPG archetype, I guess, were you thinking of with her? Is she just more like a supporting for the other two? She's got a couple of pretty good moves on her own. I love the name Saddle Sore. I love that. It's hysterical.
Oh yeah.
So what were you thinking when you were developing the three family members next to each other, trying to create a bit of a balance?
So Celine, we'll start with her. She's Brink's little sister, and she's not as involved with the family promotion. She's more of like an indie darling where she, runs the circuit. She goes from promotion to promotion, promotion, and she has this whole cowgirl gimmick, which does fit some of the Canadian styles as well.
Stampede.
That's right. And as far as like what RPG class she would fall into, there is a large playable cast from WrestleQuest. It's 12 overall. She's what I would consider more of like a duelist almost, where she has high agility and then kind of high risk, high reward maneuvers, where a lot of her move set is based around counters. So, you can activate a counter, like that's your turn, and then you basically entice the enemy to attack you. And you can do that with different equipment and manager abilities and whatnot to draw fire to one specific character. And she has counters set up, where someone rushes at her, she'll interrupt their move and then whip them into the ropes and follow up with a back elbow or things like that. The trade-off is that she's kind of squishy. She has like low HP, low defense. Okay. So it's all about that kind of like high risk, high reward. And then how you play into that, do you double down and equip all those mechanics and all that equipment and those managers to make those opportunities happen? Or do you, take a more measured approach and instead, put heavy armor or put a manager that can buffer defenses so if those, those setups fail, she won't be as damaged.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. No, go for it.
I was going to say, I know we talked about it a little bit. For those listening who haven't played the game yet or haven't seen the game yet, managers are passive members of your party who you can equip essentially to give a buff to the entire team. Give like a perk a passive perk that runs throughout the entire match. The first one you run into is the alligator. His name eludes me. I want to say Slimy. Slimy. And then you'll find more throughout the adventure that you can add to your party. Equip one at a time, right? It's one per battle, and then they provide passive. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No, the manager is great. Quick side note: some of the legends you can actually unlock as managers.
Love that. Love that. That's cool. Cool. That's awesome. So I want to get back into real quick some of the mechanics in the game. I know we talked about the pin first off, but before we get into that, you mentioned equipping the abilities and things like that. I love the gimmick system. I think that's a really cool way to implement. Like if a wrestler's a powerhouse, you can there are obvious perks and downsides to that, and they are incorporated here. Technician is one, and so talk to me about developing that system and figuring out a way to get these different wrestling archetypes into an RPG, but not just like as a class system. There's a little more to it than that.
That's definitely where it started out, the idea of JRPG classes. You have your wizard, your fighter, your thief, etc. And that's reflected in the cast a little bit. Like each one lends themselves to that to an extent. But again, like that system is, it's been done. Everyone knows it. It's recognizable. How do we wrestlify it? So wrestling, you have again these sort of archetypes where the powerhouse, big, strong guys, the high flyer, these lucha libre, death-defying moves off the top rope and whatnot. So we tied that into the other combat mechanics for WrestleQuest, most notably the hype meter. The hype meter appears in every battle, and it's an indication of the audience's engagement with the fight. So if you come in and you're just tapping the attack button all the time on autopilot, like you used to do in RPGs, the audience is going to get bored, and that meter drains out, and then your enemies get stronger. But if you approach combat with a little bit of strategy, you can have that meter sway in your favor instead. When you do, you get more damage, better experience points, better loot after the battle. So it all ties back into controlling that. And the hype types are how you do that, and they determine how you generate hype. So the powerhouse type will generate whenever he attacks someone or whenever he, KOs someone. The technician, whenever he nails a button prompt or inflicts a status effect. So it's the idea beyond wrestlfication is player agency. Too many times in RPGs, you have a limited sort of way to express your moveset. And there's little crossover between the characters. And in some cases, it might even seem like, well, all my characters are interchangeable. At a certain point, like they're more or less, they can all do the same damage. There's no point to have anyone in my party. WrestleQuest, we really tried to give the player the freedom to choose their party and then choose their strategy in combat. So you can just go for straight damage and hope to improve the hype meter that way. Or, you can choose your manager, choose your equipment, choose your characters based on inflicting debuffs. And that's a whole new strategy, and that's a whole new way to get that hype meter pumped up. Again, it's all about giving players agency in a genre where they typically don't have as much.
Right. Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. Like I said, it feels more pro wrestling than it does basic JRPG classes.
Yeah.
And I find myself going into party building, like when I'm crafting it to go to the next section of the game, based on that. Like if this guy's going to be the technician, I need to make sure he's, built like a technician or a powerhouse and stuff like that. I really do enjoy that. So this pin mechanic, right?
Yeah.
I have my only criticism of this game so far is that I want the pin mechanic to be a solid 1, 2, 3, like it has been my entire life ever since I've been watching wrestling. But it doesn't work like that. Sometimes you can do a little 1, 2, and then 3, or if you're lucky enough, you can get it a quick 3 count, stuff like that. Have other people said this to you about how it's not the normal, like
cadence?
Cadence, and whether or not it took them some time to get used to that?
I think more so than the idea of like the cadence of the 1, 2, 3. We spent a lot of time thinking even back to the first PAX East, where we kind of like debuted WrestleQuest in 2022 to now in 2023. Even since then, it's come leaps and bounds. But tweaking the difficulty has been the major standing point there because, as we play test, we become experts and we're able to nail it. And then we show it live and people are like, wow, this is hard. And, we realize that 50% of people struggle with it. So we make it easier and, add some other things to make it feel nicer. So I think more so than matching that cadence, it's a way of making it have good game feel first. Yep. That's been our priority.
Yeah, I would say there were a couple of times where even after I got the flow of it, where I would miss, mostly on 3, I noticed a 2 count, not on purpose, I promise. And like I was like, oh wow, I missed that, and it caught me by surprise. So I was a little more engaged and ready for the next time. Being able to pin in general, how did you decide what enemies to pin and which enemies to not? Because some enemies I can just knock out, or some I can do this pin mechanic. And are there benefits to pinning as opposed to knocking out? Because I think I also noticed if I failed enough times, I just beat them. Mm-hmm. So is there an added, besides maybe like extra bonus at the end, to nailing that pin timing? And did you ever float the idea of the pin is the only way you can beat them?
Yeah, so it comes back to the idea about balance for one, and then also, I don't know if you'd call it quality of life or what, but if we made every enemy pinnable, which was originally what we intended, we realized battles would be way too long.
Sure. Okay.
Because it does add an extra step where okay, now the enemy's down, now I'm going to go in and pin them. So we made it so just enemies that are more like wrestlers or wrestling based, you would have to pin. And normal sort of like grunt type enemies, you can defeat normally just by reducing their HP to 0. Yep. So that was the first kind of step, was all right, how long do we want this game to be? Because if battles are too long, you need to pin every character all the time, it's going to drag out. So we tried to have a mix, especially early on when you're just learning and things like that. Mix of, make it 1 to 2 rather than all 3 are mandatory pins.
Okay.
The other aspect of that too is that we also wanted to have more ways than just pinning to defeat the wrestlers. So many abilities are based around finishing moves instead, where if you can get your enemy fatigued, we call it, is either when they're at low HP, like sub 20%, or if it's just a thing where you can add it as a status effect. There's a lot of moves that will fatigue your enemy. They're like moves that aim towards the gut or things like that. When they're in that fatigue state, you can do a finishing move on them, which has a chance to automatically KO them. So It gets back to, again, the idea of wrestling. Sometimes it's not always like a pin, how you do it. Sometimes, it's just you knock them out cold. So there's that, and that's a whole other combat strategy to approach those enemies that need pinned.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I noticed, after a while, the pinning mechanic did become a little more natural. I don't want you to think that I'm still stuck in the cadence. But I also completely agree with you that if every enemy could be pinned, the game would be bloated. So I'm glad whoever decided that whatever team decided to pull back on that, have to show that restraint, which I'm sure was hard to do because
That
you
was
know it's
Arson.
a really cool thing. That was who?
Arson.
Shout out to Arson. Shout out there because that was the right call. Good.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. So last thing I want to get into mechanically, and then I have two more questions. One mechanically and one story. Mechanically, tag teams, triple teams. Very cool way to incorporate the tag team feel by just setting up for a tag team, and then as long as they're compatible, being able to execute that team move. What does it take to become compatible in order to unlock those moves? Because I noticed in the beginning I didn't have I had people on my team, but there wasn't the tag team move there. Do they have to level up so many times together in order to create that tag team edge, or do they have to be a certain level and then just have those people in the party? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's the latter. You have to be at a certain level before they're available, and then it depends on when those party members are together, because some will come and go, others will be available only at certain parts. Eventually, you have all of them at your disposal.
Sure.
But it depends basically on individual power level and then story progress.
And then you're making parties of 3 once you have more than 3. Do you have to eventually select?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the things we actually don't talk about too much in panels or at the booth and whatnot. There are several dungeons that have you splitting your party into multiple sub teams.
Interesting.
So early on, I would say in the first quarter of the game, there's one where you have 2 parties of 2, but eventually you get to the point where you have 3 parties of 3, and there's different things where it's separate tracks in the same dungeon where you have to solve tandem puzzles and things like that. And once you get to that point, you can also assign a manager to each one of those parties.
Cool.
Obviously, we had to save stuff like that for the late game once you're used to all the mechanics. But you do encounter those, a handful of times throughout, just for another sort of unique take on dungeons and RPGs.
Are you switching at will, or is there you do an event and then you switch the?
No, you're switching at will, because most of the time it requires you'll have Team A, up on the catwalks or something, but there's something blocking their way, and Team B down on the ground can deactivate that, and vice versa.
I got it. Okay. Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
You had me at catwalk, Zack. We don't use catwalk enough around here.
Complex dungeons in my WrestleQuest. Yes, please. Yeah, that's exciting. Cool. All right. So my one question about story is I'm going to talk about Randy Santos for a second, because in my written preview, which you can read at mmorpg.com for those listening, went up last Thursday, the 12th, I think it was. You mentioned he's always in kayfabe, and there's dialogue between him and other characters where someone mentions the writers, and he's like, writers? What are you talking about? And things like that. I think the idea, and if you don't want to talk about this, I understand, of exploring that moment in every wrestling fan's life where they realize what's actually happening, right?
Yeah.
That moment of realization that, well, it's not real, or it's scripted, or whatever. I don't like using the word fake. I'm sure you guys don't either. Is that something you plan to explore, or is that not something you wanted to do in this first go around? I love that idea. I love if that's something you're going to do. That's cool as shit. I got to bleep myself. But I wanted to make sure I asked about that, because it's something that definitely stuck out to me.
Definitely.
In that first stretch.
Yeah, I mean, not to give too much away, but again, that's Randy's entire character. Is this idea of kayfabe. For him, it's so real, and this childlike innocence he has with. It's not even so much childlike innocence. It's more just this purity he has with the sport and the idea of being a hero. And obviously, as he gets deeper in the industry and he's going on this journey, that idea, that innocence, that purity gets challenged again and again. So eventually it comes down to the point of him, sort of having that moment. And then it's well, where do you go from there? What do you do with that? So again, don't want to give too much away, but I think you'll be pleased when you have a chance to play the entire game.
Awesome. That's exciting. So San Diego Comic-Con this week, and then we're a couple weeks out from launch, August 8th. I keep wanting to say 9th. It's not the 9th. It's the 8th. August 8th is when you can play WrestleQuest on everything. Even, another thing I wanted to ask you about. you guys are coming to Netflix. You will be mobile via Netflix. You will be exclusive to the Netflix app. So you load up the Netflix app on your phone, you find WrestleQuest, you download it to your iPad or your iPhone or your Android, and you can play WrestleQuest on the go. Talk to me a little bit about how that came to be. I know that's relatively new. Last couple of months, that was, I think it was announced, May, I want to say, May or June, that actually happened. What about Netflix as a mobile carrier, or not mobile carrier, a mobile host for your game stuck out to you, not only, as a publisher, but also as like an alternative to self-publishing, if that makes sense?
They had a kind of a call out throughout the industry looking for like narrative-driven, like story-driven game projects, and somebody who was working on press for WrestleQuest on behalf of Skybound was just working with them in like a collaborative way, saying, "Hey, like, there's this game we think you should check out. It's called WrestleQuest. And here's the hook, and here's the art." And they just embraced it right away, and they were just really excited about adding it into the fold. So for us, it's a way to get WrestleQuest in more hands and more people. They brought more languages, more regions. I can't wait to see how like that platform develops in general. I think there's a lot of new momentum in like the subscription like world on the future. Like I think eventually a lot of games come that way. We didn't see it as something that takes away anything either from the wrestling fans. I have to imagine a lot of folks who are playing on mobile aren't playing on Switch and vice versa. So
sure.
It was kind of like serendipitous, I guess. Some folks who were just WrestleQuest fans brought it up, and then they kind of sought it out.
Yeah. Now, will that be touchscreen play, controller play, both?
Deadly touchscreen play. I'm not actually sure on. I don't think there's controller functionality for the mobile port.
Okay.
We're kind of like watching them build the Netflix platform. So we're like driving the car while the back of the car is being assembled, right?
Interesting.
So it's like they're like I just shared that this morning with Zack as an analogy for how we operate. But it's like
Mega Cat driving with the car still in.
No doubt, but it's funny because like the Netflix games team was like 5 people, and now it's like 50 people or something.
That's huge.
So they're just actively adding in all these layers and layers of kind of like feedback of like how fans are responding and how to make bigger, better games and where they go. So we're excited to be part of it at this phase because they just stacked up a ton of talent and do all sorts of cool stuff. So it's been interesting to watch though, because even since we started WrestleQuest for the Netflix platform to now, that platform, that team has developed a great deal.
Yeah. Have they been hands-on in or are they just kind of let you do your thing?
Yeah, they're super hands-on. Yeah, they have like a high expectation for and mobile expertise, which we don't have. Like we're not a mobile games company, cool. Right? So that's been awesome. They definitely have like a North Star quality standard too, which made us feel pretty good.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate your time. I know you're getting ready to go out to San Diego, so the fact that you were able to sit down with me, talk about your great game, very much appreciated. August 8th, WrestleQuest on everything. If you haven't pre-ordered it or you're not ahead of the game yet, get on it, because if you're a wrestling fan, an RPG fan, both or neither, I do think there is something for you here. And Zack Manko and James Deighan, I could talk to you guys forever, but I know our time is coming up soon. Wanted to make sure I said a proper farewell, and thank you for coming on. Very excited to play your game, and good luck with everything, I guess is the only thing I can say.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having us. Great seeing you again, sir. One wrestling fan to another.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, guys. And with that, that is the end of episode number 134 of the Cheesesteaks and Controllers podcast, presented by Fox PHL The Gambler, 102.5 FM, 1480 AM, iHeartRadio. And as I say every week, if you're listening to these words, you've reached the end of the episode, and I very much appreciate that you have done so. It always means a lot to me that everyone listens to this show when I get to talk to really cool people, or if you just listen to my voice for an hour. And with that, I wish you a fantastic weekend, and even better week right behind it. And I will be back again next week with more on Cheesesteaks and Controllers. Goodbye.